and Warren Farrell has this quote: "This was an argument, the gender war, the sex war. It was a battle where only one side showed up."
No, I don't hate women, and it is funny, and it's also, I find it to be a misogynistic thing to say, actually, that you could only possibly think for yourself if you hated yourself and all other women.
And of course, when my book was published, the critical establishment said, yes, you are the only one having these stupid, crazy thoughts. And
if it's controversial to stand up and say that you think that men and women should be treated equally, then it's a pretty bizarre state of affairs we've got ourselves into, really.
Because you have to remember, a few years ago, literally nobody in the mainstream would acknowledge any of these issues. They would just outright deny them.
But yeah, the public enemy number one has never really been men's rights advocates. We've been the unmentionable public enemies.
When I talked to people about making this video, I couldn't quite bring myself to tell them what the actual subject matter was. Men's rights still seems taboo somehow. Advocates are routinely ridiculed by much of the media when they try to raise subjects. I'd met many of the issues before, but what of the people? I decided to speak to the people involved in this argument to find out who they were, what they wanted, and how they differ from the common media caricature.
Men are trash is a phrase I adore because it implies waste. Toxic masculinity wastes so much human potential, but so much can be reclaimed if we're clever and committed. I hope we're on the cusp of a giant recycling program. #MeToo. 135 retweets and 750 likes at the time that I took the photograph. And it's a constant stream of misandry. I logged onto Facebook and my local council had an advertisement up that was kind of offering services for victims of domestic violence, and the image was a broken heart with the words "boyfriend material?" ?
But with domestic violence, it's slightly different, because where we talk about victims of domestic violence and we get the 40% statistic, that's only from self-reporting through the crime survey of England and Wales. If we then look at wider studies, Martin Fiebert was his name, who did a study, a meta-analysis of like 343 different papers altogether, which totaled about 440,850 participants, found that the domestic violence issue is actually split pretty much right down the middle. I mean, it's 50-50 in terms of perpetration and victimization rates.
But there were more consequences for men, and therefore the rate, you see a decline in the rate. But there were no consequences for women. People were ignoring the fact that women were perpetrating violence, and so you don't see any decline over that almost 20-year period from 75 to 92. Yeah. One of
So I wouldn't necessarily qualify domestic violence as a gendered issue, but in terms of these sort of problems, it's not necessarily right to consider the issue inherently as a sexed issue, depending on what the context is, but solutions should be made or adapt to fit whatever the problem is, if the problem itself is in some way sexed, as per.
It's a nice truth to believe. It's simple. It's much simple. Like, I've always seen it as a scale. It's nice and simple if you believe men have it good and women have it bad, because then all you have to do is make sure women have it nicer. But when you start to learn that it's not as simple as that, it's actually, for example, on homelessness, men have it shit, or on earnings, women have it shit, or on when you start to learn that actually it's all over the place and it's issue-based, and you have to start deciding in which situation do you help who, life becomes a lot more complicated.
Incredibly, such to that if you speak about the case, it's a criminal offence. If you speak about what goes on inside those courtrooms, you can be locked up in jail. That's how secret it is. If you name professionals, you get locked away. If you name children, you get locked away. If you name the judge, I think you can get locked away. Yeah, it's all clamped down under layers and layers of bureaucracy and red tape. It is fucked. Absolutely. So you could go in there and get completely shafted. You could get hit with, child sex abuse allegations that are outrageously false. You could be, you could provide, CCTV evidence to prove that you weren't even there, and they'll still stick the charges against you because fuck you. Honestly, what are you going to do? There's nothing you can do. You can't talk about your case outside. Yeah, there's things such as non-molestation orders, which can be used to essentially tell a parent, if you go near the kids when I don't want you to, you're going to prison. And they can be slapped on a parent without notice, almost arbitrarily in some cases, so long as you can just allege that there's domestic violence. You don't even need to prove it. I mean, the whole system is just fucked.
Just atrocious. And I think one of the reasons behind that is that they're a secret court. Okay, they are severely corrupt. And the reason why they're severely corrupt is because they have a good amount of anonymity. And as a result, they're not an open court, so they're not open to speculation by the public. Since they're not open to speculation, they can continue being corrupt, and they can just get away with it because nobody is allowed to see it.
Because of the gender stuff. It's all sort of identity politics. And that's why the men's rights movement's taken longer to sort of take off. Because you can't get across these ideas in a couple of sentences. This is why it was Karen that got people into this, because she talks about it for hours on end, and it takes hours on end at the very least to sort of make the case for men's rights. Because most people are convinced by default men don't need rights, men already have all the rights, and then when you try to explain the ones they don't have, the obfuscation starts happening. The word games come out.
Generally, these guys are very, very hurt and they're very, very angry, but ultimately they're not dangerous, or they're not, or should I say, they have the massive desire to, all it is they want somebody to care, and they want society to care. And for one reason or another, I guess people just can't see that. They don't look past and realise when they're aggressively arguing with you, it's not that they dislike you. It's that, I guess, it's a form of severe dysfunction, where really they just want people to care and say, okay, you're in pain for one reason or another. Generally, the most damaged men of society end up in this because of all these reasons. And they're just looking for somebody to care and preferably build them up. And I think that's one of the things that men's rights community have tried to foster. I've tried to give a guy here, okay, if you need to vent, we care. How can we build them up and help them?
Because in private law cases, especially in family law is the worst, overwhelmingly, you can go in there and you can chuck any kind of allegation you like, just lob it out. And the only consequence is, if it fails, it fails. Whereas if you go into a criminal court and you make an allegation that is quite obviously false, you get done for contempt of court, you get done for perjury, you get done for submitting false evidence. But you do it in a family court, that's fine, don't worry about it. So that's why allegations are so prevalent. And then there's also the fact that with domestic abuse, one of the qualifiers since LASPO, the Legal Aid and Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Act 2012, one of the qualifiers for legal aid is domestic abuse. So if you can allege and make a strong allegation of domestic abuse, then you get legal aid. So if you want funding for your case and to be essentially given a state-sponsored defense or prosecution lawyer, then all you have to do is allege domestic abuse. So what happened after LASPO? Allegations of domestic abuse quadrupled. The allegations are prevalent because you might as well make an allegation because you get your lawyer paid for.
and another one of her cronies was standing up and challenging Philip Davies to prove that fathers were necessary to bring up children, which is like, I mean, seriously, how can you be a politician when you don't have access to such basic information? Like, there is no end of evidence that fathers are necessary for children. It's misandry that can be said in UK Parliament.
But then even these contact orders, there's absolutely no obligation to follow them whatsoever. None. So, you can get this order and don't mean nothing. You're not going to see your kids. In fact, in 2011, there were 2,000 applications to the court for enforcement of orders that were already in place. These orders that, the University of Warwick study said are so fantastic. And of those 2,000 applications for enforcement, only 1% were successful. In 2016, there were 6,000 applications for enforcement of contact orders, of which only 1% were successful. And in the first quarter of 2017, that fell to 0.75%.
I became interested in the role of women in the men's rights movement after hearing so many men's rights activists being accused of inherently hating women. I contacted the Liberty Bells, a group of women who argue in favour of issues primarily impacting men, and offer the female critique of identity politics.
Where are the UK females? And they were out there, but they weren't very kind of, they were all just kind of below the radar rather than slightly above it. So I thought, right, I'm going to invite everyone, and I organised a dinner and got a group of ladies together.
The group was subject to a hit piece conducted by an organisation claiming to be anti-fascist and anti-racist. The Liberty Bells were linked to a far-right group via an event one of them had spoken at, and through MP Philip Davies.
Well, you see, it's funny because that's what I'd always been afraid of, I was always afraid that they'd come after me with absolute lies and things that were just completely not true. And that's why I was anonymous for such a long time. And then I had this idea that if I got a group of women together, I looked at the honey badgers and I thought they've got some kind of safety in numbers. So I thought if we get a group together, we'll be safe. And in a way, it was almost the opposite that happened, which meant that, if one of you makes a mistake, all of you can be tarred by that brush. So part of me, it was horrible. So when I found out about it, I was really upset, actually. More upset than I thought probably would have expected myself to be, because I've been doing this by that point. I've probably been doing this for 5 years already, and my skin has got a lot thicker. You have to develop a thick skin, but suddenly it was exactly the things I'd been warned about right at the beginning, because when I started doing this, it was pretty much just the MRAs. There weren't really other people doing this. It was not, the situation 5 years ago was not the situation now. And I was just warned, what they'll do is these feminist activists, radical feminists, will phone your employer, make false allegations, they'll phone your partner's employer, make false allegations, they'll make allegations about your family, all this kind of stuff. And I'd escaped that for so long, and I thought, if they come after me, it'll be something about what I've said. Like I would have thought that they would have maybe found one of my tweets and twisted it, or maybe I said something a few years ago that I wouldn't have said in the same way now, and they'd actually come after me. But what was so disappointing and disgusting and dishonest was that it was guilt, not just by association, but guilt by sort of several degrees of association, and it was all dishonest. And suddenly my name was in this article. They hadn't found any dirt about me at all, but I was being branded a far-right extremist with zero evidence about anything I'd said or done. And I was actually being linked to groups that I had genuinely, hand on heart, I had never heard of these. I can't even remember the name of them now because I don't know anything about them. So I was pretty upset. For example, back to our hit piece, we were contacted by a journalist from The Guardian asking for our side of the story. And when we gave them our side of the story, which obviously, if you've watched my video, you know is very, very reasonable, they didn't do a story on it because, of course, then they thought they were going to find these women that thought, you know, all women should be in the kitchen, whatever. And when that's not what they found, the story would have been Hope Not Hate, this leftist, Corbynista charity has targeted a group of women in a really nasty and abusive way. But, of course, that wasn't the story that fits The Guardian, so it didn't go anywhere. You know, they could have done an expose on Hope Not Hate, would have been a bit better known. But interestingly, though, the positive side of that is what happened was it made me realise I have to talk, because I hadn't made any of my YouTube videos by that point, and it made me realise, hang on a minute, when someone Googles my name, either the first thing they're going to find is this, or the first thing they can find is me actually talking and actually being myself, and they can listen to me and the truth of who I am and what I actually think. So in a way, it gave me the bravery to just say, well, actually now I'm free.
The Hope Not Hate article was an awful piece of writing. Claims of the Liberty Bells being extreme right are completely at odds with their video content, social media, and in conversation with myself. The role of women in the online argument intrigued me. What made women decide to campaign in favour of men's issues and against the feminist argument? And how welcome are they in the movement?
It's called Messages for Men. My message for men is pretty much the same as it was 25 years ago when I wrote that book, which is that men need women.
We are women like me, you know, women like Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Sarah Haider, you know, all these kind of people. We are the biggest threat to their narrative because we melt their narrative.
And the people who are saying, you know, who are standing up for women's rights are the working classes, you know, and all.
Facing that, how can we get around that? How can we get over that? How can we open the way to what Fidel Bogan was talking about, that kind of wider perception of the truth? My own view is that the key to that transformation lies with women. The Honourable Belinda, God bless you, and all the other women involved here today, Natty, Elizabeth, Paula Wright's not here, but we owe them such thanks for getting this together and bringing this up. And what we need them to do is much more of the same.
If I look at my own family background, I think I could have so easily and very justifiably become a feminist. And I don't really know how. It's kind of a very, for me, it's kind of like logic and thinking in a way, but it's also, I do, you know, and I'm older now, I kind of feel maybe I'm in a safe place. I really, sound silly, I actually see men as quite different from women, and I really like what I see. That's how I see them, you know.
Well, they are important. I think they hold more weight because people are more willing to listen to women when it comes to things like that. But the thing is, they don't get accused of being misogynist. They get accused of having internalized misogyny, which is just, you know, is basically you hate yourself. You know, it's so ridiculous. But
yep. And one of the reasons I do this is because back in 2012, 2013, all of a sudden, people who I had known for many years, men, you know, white public school educated, privileged men, were sitting across the dinner table from me, men who I'd been at the same university with, who'd known me for 10 years, knew all the opportunities I'd had, were sitting opposite me at dinner parties and having the gall to tell me that I was oppressed because I earned less than my husband, and then when I said, no, I earned less than my husband because of decisions that I made, to tell me that I had internalized misogyny and that I had been brainwashed since I was a tiny child to make those choices. And I was so angry. You don't understand, okay? Maybe just a bit of...
Because I believe that it's going to be women who punch a hole in the wall which is dividing us at the moment. It is the Berlin Wall of our time. It is the apartheid system of our time. It is the totalitarianism of our time, which we have to defeat. And it's down to women, I think, to lead the way, because they have the power. They have the voice. Men do not have the voice. Think of...
For me, I didn't really think about the disadvantages of males. I thought more about, I felt advantaged. I remember this was when I was at university and being taught about, universal female subordination. And it was just the fact that I could have a baby. It's like, I'm just head and shoulders, that just puts females, that was how I perceived it. It's like, we're in such an advantaged position because we've got that capacity, which men don't have. And that, in a way...
When I joined the Open University, before my course started, I stuck my head in the debating forum and I put up several posts, and, probably all of them were regarding... one of them was regarding Brexit, and then there was like 4 regarding feminism. We were having, debates about it all. And the women, feminists, were accusing every man who agreed with me at any point, even if he wasn't consistently agreeing with me, of only doing so because I'm young and pretty.
I have to say, the first crack actually in all, so I've been doing little things in my own little ways, but the first crack was actually seeing Mike Buchanan's name. I think it was in the Standard, or it was in some article, and it was this guy who'd set up an organisation for, this party campaigning for men, and I was just really intrigued, and that was the first, and then I looked into that, and then it sort of branched out. So that was, and it was like suddenly there was a place where I could direct my energy. So
asked me if I was introverted, because some of us are, and I've been thinking about it, and I definitely am. I know I am. And I get really shy and word blind when I have to talk in public. But I feel like I'm being forced into it because people need to say the things that I'm saying, and it's that old slogan, if not you, who, if not now, when. And so I really, I'm really being pushed out of my comfort zone, kind of, and with going on the radio and stuff like that, it's been really challenging for me.
It does feel like that. I'm quite interested that it is like that for other people, because I didn't have that particular moment either. It's just a case of sort of gradually thinking things through. And I think actually, one of the things that perhaps was quite important for me, I've been thinking about this recently, because every so often I get rejected by friends because of my views, maybe not the closest friends, but, every so often, I had someone recently who I hadn't heard from ages. Well, we just sort of went our own ways, and then, through Facebook got back in touch, and I said what I was doing, and I just got instantly chucked overboard. I was quite taken aback, actually, because there's also a part of me which is like, there's me and there's what I believe in. But what I do think has been quite important for me is, in a way, having and I don't know if this is if females are different in this, but it's certainly that maybe this has been important for me, is kind of being more in my family. It's like,
yeah, I'm never myself. I play an artificially enhanced version of my personality. Why wouldn't I? I mean, if you have the option of doing that, why wouldn't you ham it up a bit? you know.
They told us back at CNN we're infested with some strange white men.
And when are you not being yourself? Even if you're impersonating someone else, you're still being yourself impersonating someone else, because that's something you do.
Well, there's a number of reasons behind that. If you're an introvert, you're not really that socialized, so you're far less likely to drink the poison Kool-Aid, i.e. you're part of this sheep groupthink. And the second reason is that if you're an introvert, well, why are you an introvert? Even if they don't thoroughly understand all of the letters, they will have enough experience, at least subconsciously, to realise that the world they live in isn't really right. And this is the first thing that they've come across, that actually it makes sense. It actually fills that gap in the mind that...
And yeah, you know, I've done an awful lot of thinking, you know, because remember, I've taken the journey from being pro-feminist to being feminist to being an MRA to being anti-feminist. And all of that's taken... I mean, it reminds me of the Jordan Peterson quote, which goes something like, to learn is to die voluntarily in order to be reborn again, in big ways and in small. And yeah, I feel like that's happened to me a lot, and I feel like now there are certain things that I can instinctively see and just know what's right. There's, you know, a trait of introversion, which is being inside your own head and thinking about things a lot that might predispose you, maybe even to seeing things more clearly.
Arranging it all. Anyone who knows me will say I couldn't organise a piss up in a brewery. I've never organised so much as a birthday party before. So for me, it was a massive challenge to organise something like this. But that was part of why it became so big, is my stubbornness. I don't like being told no. Yeah, it's justification for the FN. It's also it's not letting them win. It's not letting the ones that I consider to be in the wrong, I guess, whatever way you want to interpret it, to win through their bad tactics and their trying to silence. And at the point the Kickstarter for the Red Pill was coming out, I was at the point where I supported what they said, but I wasn't willing to stick my neck out. I agree with a lot of what you say, but this isn't worth sticking my neck out over. Not so much, in principle it was worth that, but the damage to me personally and the hassle over it, I wasn't that committed. And then by the time the Red Pill came out, and the screening was coming up, I was debating, you know what, do I want to commit this much to spending like a few £100 on a small screening, because that's a fair bit of money, and I'm also then exposing myself to my friends because I'm showing them my political interests, because they'll be like, well, why are you paying all this money to watch a film? So that to me was my crossing the threshold from viewing to taking part.
Work in the sex industry, I think we owe them better than to go in and only go in with one ideology, because funnily enough, when feminists go into a situation, the solution always happens to be more feminism. Magically, that's just always the solution, because they think they have the diagnosis of all these problems, patriarchy. It's like
think of the Weinstein scandal, the reaction of people like Tom Hanks and George Clooney, those useful idiots, as the Soviet Union used to call them, was to say men should shut up and listen, even though the nature of the subject here was the nature of masculinity.
Saying, you know, men are people too, men need help too, flies right in the face of the idea of women and girls first, which is what we've been taught since day one.
Yes, I don't think that the type of feminism that is promoted in the mainstream media all that well reflects the the views a lot of people have.
The same goes for women. You criticise a woman, sexist. You make a joke about women or a woman, sexist. And it's like, sometimes, you know, it doesn't come from sexism. Sometimes it's just a joke. Sometimes it's just criticism.
The issue of feminism kept cropping up. Many of the people I spoke to said it was impossible to talk about men's rights issues, without also critiquing those who they cite as being responsible for preventing discussion about them.
Where feminism's gone so wrong, it's just sort of adopted, it's completely co-opted itself to this, you know, patriarchal system, and it's actually setting about, you know, when I look at feminism, all those negative things that they say about patriarchy, which I don't think were true, you know, they say all these things, and they're actually making true what they said, but they're making it true with women in the place of men, if you see what I mean. You know, the things that feminists accuse men of, they are creating and doing themselves. I mean, feminism just seems like, you know, I'm not sure, I'm not giving very concrete examples, but I just feel it's, you know, every day just brings. What was it I heard today about how the Me Too campaign means that men are just really reluctant to have meals with women, for example, you know, in the workplace, because, you know, because they're so worried about being accused of something and how damaging that is. You know, there's not a day goes by where I don't sort of just feel the full onslaught of how damaging feminism has been for society. So it's really difficult for me to be sympathetic to it, although I know that if you want to have good arguments, you need to try and understand other people's positions.
Men and women can achieve the same things, they're just as capable, yada yada. Like, that was part of how I was raised, and I never once in my entire life heard someone in seriousness tell me anything different. And suddenly, every time I opened a magazine, it was girls are brainwashed into believing they're worthless, girls are brainwashed into believing they're stupid. And I just thought, what planet are you on? Firstly. Secondly, this is what they want women to believe. They have a perverse vested interest in making women believe, and young girls, teaching them that they are oppressed and the world is rigged against them, and how awful it will be if they go into certain careers. And another reason at that particular point, when this started happening in 2013, I was working for a tech startup. And this narrative of how women get treated in tech was just completely alien to me. And I thought, this is what is going to keep women down, because these people are on an agenda in search of a problem. They're creating these problems. They're teaching this to women. And, you know, if you keep reinforcing it enough, people are going to find it in the tiniest things, you know, because they'll believe that that confirms all of these things that they've been told.
I was badgering her about it. And she said, well, I don't want to read it because I don't want to find out that I've been wrong. So that's, I think that's instrumental partly in what's going on. You know, we've had the development of this fictional ideology, this creed based on falsehood, fiction, and it's had adherents. You know, they've done very well. You know, it's been very good for them, and it continues to be very good for them. You know, it continues to bring them appointments and riches and whatnot. And nobody wants to say, hang on a minute, none of this hangs together, none of this makes any sense.
Working away at every single one of our liberties. There's a campaign called 50-50 Parliament that's trying to mandate who can and cannot be elected. There's all women shortlists that do the same. They are trying to, you know, sort of laws on, you know, things like coercive control and what evidence can and cannot be admitted in a rape trial, taking away the right to due process, the right to innocent until proven guilty. Although recently in the UK we have had these cases of mobile phone evidence not being, you know, that did exonerate the men, you know, coming to light, and thank goodness those cases have been thrown out, and I think people are beginning to realise, you know, these people are absolutely becoming tyrannical. Look at the Lindsay Shepherd incident. It's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, because most people are quite passive and kind of ambivalent about most of this, and it's not till some drama happens that they'll take any notice. you know, and I mean, our baseline that we have to meet is well argued and well evidenced. We've known that for a long time. You know, feminists get to come up with sound bites based on nothing or based on highly questionable, very often completely erroneous facts and data. You know, they get away with that, but we don't. So we have to do all of the kind of data trawling and argument building, and we have to go through a massively long process.
Well, you see, this is it. You see, and this gets back to the whole suffragette thing. You see, I don't actually believe that we needed feminism in order to achieve those changes. This is something which Neil Linden argues in his No More Sex Wars. You know, some of the really crucial changes in, I think, women and universities, perhaps, I can't remember which they were, I'd have to get the manuscript down, but because I don't have the actual book, I've got the printout, but you know, some of these crucial changes happened before feminism became a force to be reckoned with. And I think that, you know, this is, and the reason I mention about the suffragettes, you see, I think we could have achieved all these things by gentle, persistent campaigning behind the scenes. I don't think we needed to create a movement which insisted that we lived in an oppressive patriarchy.
The nature of the subject here was the nature of masculinity and maleness. But men have no voice in that. They're just supposed to listen. And in doing so, in saying that, those men, those fellow travellers, are actually uttering the same words, the very same words, as like Suzanne Moore and Julie, what's her name? No, not her. The other terrible Julie. The other really... Birchall! The Birchall, that overinflated slug who's left a trail of poison across the face of British life for 30 years. And what she says is, men, shut up! You have no voice in this. Well, actually, we don't have any voice in this. The people who have the voice and have the power is women. And we need them to lead the way. So
to a soundbite, they'll ignore that it completely and utterly lacks nuance. And what is crazy somehow is, in a way, YouTube can be so much more nuanced. You know, the home of the cat video. Actually, I can tell you, in their handling of a subject like Gamergate, for example, infinitely more nuanced than the Times of London. It's absolutely crazy. It's the truth.
So I was walking along this morning with this lunchtime with you, and I was thinking back to the moment in October 1991 when I was writing my book, and there was about 2 a.m. I suddenly thought, am I the only one in the world who's having these thoughts? I really genuinely did. And it was a rather terrifying moment. And of course, when my book was published, the critical establishment said, yes, you are the only one having these stupid, crazy thoughts, and you don't deserve to have any friends, and you won't have any job, you don't deserve to be a father, and you could be bankrupted. But that wasn't the only thing that happened. It also happened that hundreds of people wrote to me from all around the world to say, actually, I've been thinking in very much the same kind of way, which is, of course, tremendously encouraging. And I was thinking that while we were walking, how great to be among so many people. And this genuinely is, like the other people who've spoken, much the biggest audience that I've been involved with in the last 20 years that I've been speaking to this kind of gathering. So great. But it's tiny, it's fractional. Think of those 5,000 women walking behind Emily Davison's coffin. Think of the 50,000 lining the street. Think of what Jan Palach did. This is a fractional minority. And we agree, I mean, the people I've been talking to today agree, the reason is because nobody gives a crap. Now,
that is something a lot of us have in common. It's like not having a life to lose. Men in particular, because if you've got a wife and children and a job that you can't afford to lose, then the last thing you want to do is endanger any of that by saying any of this shit online. Because all your wife has to do is say, look, he's a misogynist, here's the evidence, and then bye-bye wife, bye-bye children, bye-bye job. Whereas there's people like me who have none of the above and don't want any of them. My job is this. My job is saying dumb shit into a camera.
Yeah. Yes, I did. Yeah, I remember warning my girlfriend at the time. I mean, she wasn't at all kind of politically aware. She wasn't interested in politics. She wasn't interested in. She had kind of no cultural understanding of that end of the kind of media spectrum. And I warned her what I thought it was going to be like when the book was published. And she just thought I was being ridiculous. She thought I must be exaggerating. But in fact, what happened was far worse than I had predicted.
Yeah, I know, they did, yeah. I know. Well, you see, this is the thing, you see, the politically correct brigade have taken over so much that now people they're not obsessed about the actual issue, they're just obsessed about what words you use. And, you know, it's a sad state of affairs when you can't, nobody's interested in actually getting to grips with the reasons why there's so much male suicide, because they're too obsessed with whether you use the word commit suicide or not use the word commit suicide. I mean, these people they're all around the bend. They haven't got, they've got no sense of perspective on things or anything. Like I say, they're so obsessed with what word you use and, does that word offend somebody or does it not offend somebody? We'll be in a stage soon where nobody will ever be able to say anything in case some zealot somewhere takes offence against it.
Mr. Gapes, can I point out to everyone in the room, please, that no one in this country committed suicide since 1961, when suicide was no longer a crime. You commit murder, you commit burglary, you commit arson, you don't commit suicide. You take your own life, but you don't commit. Commit is a word that relates to a crime. Suicide is not a crime.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for picking me up again. This is, as far as I can see, a terminology. It may be important to some people, but I'm afraid if I'm going to be chastised for using the word that is used by every member of the public, as far as I can see, whenever they discuss this issue, I do apologise. But let's not get bogged down, if we don't mind, in politically correct terminology. I'd much prefer we actually dealt with the issue that I'm...
It's because the serious issues they're talking about don't affect women. If they affected women, they'd be taken seriously. And they affect men, they don't really take them seriously, because almost every single mainstream media outlet is ran and controlled and catered to feminists. That's the narrative. So when they talk about men, I mean, take for example, if somebody says they support men's rights, they're ridiculed. Look at Philip Davies, the MP. Now, Philip Davies, he's never said a bad word about women. I've never heard him say a bad word about women, and I've heard a lot of what he says. He's never said a bad word about women, but he gets called a misogynist simply because he says he supports men's rights, and he gets called a misogynist. It's because he's not saying he supports women's rights.
To an extent, the media is turning, but not because they want to. They're being compelled to, because they are having to sustain themselves off viewers, off readers, and if they don't have an engaged audience, they get no money. Which is why I find, of all places, the Daily Mail to be one of the most supportive places for men's issues, because they recognise that if you have an audience, you get money coming in for ad revenue and that sort of thing. So they will publish things that are wildly in support of us and our cause, but at the same time also publish things that are wildly against us, because it just makes money. So for me, as far as I'm concerned, if they think it's going to make money, it's going to work. And that's what mainstream media is beginning to, have to face up to. The Guardian isn't. The Guardian is doing its absolute best, to such a point where they're actually burning themselves. I don't think they've made a profit in 17 years.
UK-based Women's Equality Party tweeted, "We've got to get men to understand women's equality means men's equality too." But men's rights activists accuse feminists of actively seeking to close down meetings through protesting venue owners, pressurising them into cancelling bookings, often at short notice. Simply organising meetings is now a major problem for many in the men's rights community.
Quite is the answer. Quite serious. A recent example I can cite is, you might have seen it in the news, the Society to Establish a Minister for Men. There's a few pieces on that. The Guardian covered it. I think it made its way into BuzzFeed as well. Swain O'Pie, a friend of mine, is the head of the Society to Establish a Minister for Men, and he was trying to organise some meetings. And the one in Bath got protested, and the events, every time he's tried to book it in Cheltenham, it's always been cancelled because groups have always turned up to the locations and said, if you host this event, we will make a loud protest. We will come in with bells and whistles and we will keep protesting you and we'll ruin your business. And so what happens is we just get emails from the location saying, sorry, we're out, we don't want to risk it. Even though the people who come in, threatening to protest aren't actual customers, they're people who've never been in the pub before, but they come in and say, if you do this, we're going to, prevent you from having business. And so, the owners pull out. So it is quite serious. So that's why they did it, because this sort of threat is quite real, unfortunately.
And then I got some backlash from local activists trying to stop it. I didn't directly witness it. I was told by someone else, you do realise there's these people talking about trying to stop your event. And so I saw a couple of screenshots and thought, that's nothing to worry about. Because it's only, from what I could see, one person pestering the local activist groups and not too much else. But then the venue backed out after I'd already had a booking, because every time I got someone back down, I went bigger. And at that point, I decided I'm going to invite Cassie and fly her over from America, and no limits. Whoever I can get over here, Paul, Elam, Cassie, it doesn't matter of cost, I'll get them over. I then looked at hiring security and filming the Q&A, and that was looking quite good until a few days before the event, when they pulled out because the activists had gone to companies that also use the McGuire Hotel. I'm not sure who, but we suspect it was the Heart Foundation, to do with blood donations or breast cancer. There's a few charity events they do at the hotel, and the hotel just said, we have some regular important customers that have expressed concerns, and because we don't want to lose these customers, we're going to have to cancel. So obviously this activist group had been looking at customers of the hotel to complain to them, because directly complaining to the hotel wasn't working. So they backed out a couple of days before. Luckily I had a backup. That one, I think, because I went for over 40 venues, so it's hard to keep track of. It's hard to keep track of who cancelled publicly at what point. But yes,
it does make it difficult actually for people to turn up to the right location on time, but it's just something that we've come to expect now, because if we don't do that, if we release the name of the venue, then feminists will try to get it shut down, and by and large they are successful. So, in the 2014 International Conference on Men's Issues, which was held in Detroit, they released the name of the venue a few months before, and they were having bomb threats at the venue.
The disruption of meetings at which men and women plan to gather to discuss men's rights issues extends beyond small groups. Ms. Magazine in the United States urged readers to protest the first ever International Conference on Men's Issues held in Detroit. At the last minute, event organisers were forced to move the conference. The Messages for Men conference held in London on International Men's Day in 2017 were forced to keep the location of the venue secret, taking ticket holders there in person after a march through the streets of London to raise attention on subjects such as family, courts and the education system. When Mike Buchanan organised the 2018 conference on men's issues at St Andrews Football Stadium, a football website that had previously shown no interest in the bookings clubs take for the use of conference facilities wrote a hit piece, decrying the Justice for Men and Boys Party as misogynist. The conference was forced to move to a new location, which has now been kept secret. And then there are protests at film showings. Casey J's The Red Pill documentary attracted dissent from feminists asserting the work was misogynistic. Several showings were forced into moving or being cancelled altogether. Organising groups can prove a seemingly endless process for men's rights activists. I talked to Will Stiles. He's a student at Plymouth University and has undertaken what has proved to be a lengthy campaign to be allowed to set up a men's group on campus.
So I said, yeah, why not? Can I go along to the women's forum? They said, kind of. You might have to ask the chair because it's only really for women. I said, oh, yeah, I guess that's fair enough. Oh, I know. I'll go along to the men's forum then instead. And they were just like, what? Yeah, the men's forum, you know? And they're like, oh, there isn't one. What do you mean? I went, well, there just isn't one. Oh. So I went along to the Students' Union and asked the Democratic coordinator, so there's like no men's forum. Why not? And then, because no one's made one yet. I was like, it's no big deal. And it's just someone hasn't done it yet. It's like, okay, how do I make one? So she said, you just need to fill out this, write a motion, come along to the student council, tell us what you're going to do, and they'll vote on it. I was like, yeah, it's easy. I'll just say, guys, we forgot the men's forum, oopsie daisy, and then we'll approve it. And then we'll all carry on and, skipping meadows and whatnot. So I didn't do any research. I just thought, well, I did a little bit. I was like, let's name some men's issues off my head. I know about that one. That one's kind of an issue, just to back it up. But not that I need to back it up anyway, because it's a simple matter. If we've got one for women, let's have one for men. And I rocked up, and obviously that wasn't good enough. They basically said, you've got no idea what you're talking about. This is a ridiculous idea. Go away and rethink it, because if it gets denied now, it can't be talked about for 2 years and come back. By one vote, though, they voted on that happening. So they almost voted by one vote to just deny it there and then for 2 years. But thankfully they didn't. So I went away and I spent about 3 or 4 months researching, learning for the first time, actually learning about the men's movement properly and about feminism properly and about the whole gender political scene. And then I came back and I had a 4,000-word speech prepared with some key issues that have happened across British universities lately, such as the Adam Frost, I think it was Durham or Warwick, where a friend of his committed suicide, so he tried to set up a men's some kind of support group with men's in the title, but that was denied. I think it was later that year another of his friends committed suicide. So it's a horrible case of affairs. And I thought, I'm pretty sure that's not allowed. So I went through their policy documents and I stumbled across their equal opportunities policy, which is part of their constitution, which they have to uphold. And I thought, they didn't uphold it. I'll write to the Board of Trustees, the highest level of governance, and point out, oops, guys, you forgot to uphold your constitution. You aren't actually supposed to deny the motion. Please approve it. And they said no, because that policy and the legislation it is based on, the Equality Act, were not intended for males and do not apply to them. I think some wording similar to that. And I and the rest of the world just went, what? But yeah, I think that was what caused what is the most famous incident in the campaign so far. So it's absolutely not the end. And when this victory comes in, I'll definitely be reminding people that this isn't the end. It's not over. This is the first of many steps that need to be taken just in universities, not to mention the wider culture battle that's going on.
Well, if we had the answer to that question, we would be employing it. Unfortunately, the only solution we seem to have found so far is just the constant grind against the system.
Well, I don't know. It's a mystery. It is a mystery. It's an abiding mystery. And, obviously one thinks about it all the time because it's so incredibly difficult to make any change in that monolith. And I have been thinking for some years that there must be something in the fundamental tenets of feminism which exerts a very strong appeal both to men and to women. There must be something about the idea of barbaric masculinity, of, you know, threatening bestial sexuality in men and defenseless, helpless victim female. There must be something fundamentally appealing about that to both men and women. Otherwise, you know, that bollocks wouldn't have the kind of influence and control that it does have.
And this thing, you know, in terms of a reform or a revolution, whatever you want to call it, they don't happen overnight. They take decades. And the first order of business is to educate the masses. This is what is going on. This is how entrenched, this is what your leaders, your kind of, what have you, these people are basically feeding you all of your information, that are writing your laws, that are writing your policies. The first order of business is to show them and show it categorically across the board. This is what is happening.
For me, I think the breakthrough moment will be through domestic violence, in that male victims of domestic violence are finally beginning to be recognised, and it's coming to the national interest that men are victims of domestic violence. And I think as soon as that properly breaks and is properly officially recognised, I think that will open the door for all the rest of the issues.
I think the point is it's absolutely essential that people are meeting up in real life, and, you know, that they are getting involved in going to conferences, or, you know, going to protests, or going to meetings even, because that actual meeting in real life turns us into a proper community, and not just a cyber community of people on 4chan, you know, posting memes and this other low-level activism stuff. I think it's absolutely essential that, you know, we just need to get a lot of these people who are, they're not really involved. They're just on the sidelines, and all they're doing is the keyboard warrior shtick.
Once you actually have an official forum, an official voice, an officially elected representative, you can send that person to NUS to start talking about how the fact that they have at least 50% self-defined rule for the representation at the NUS delegates is blatant sexism, blatantly illegal, and is literally deliberately marginalising males on campus. And that's disgusting. You could actually then start to tackle the bigger issues of society, because university is not only a microcosm of society, but we educate and create the people who are going to run, control, and influence the society later in life. So it's very important we get that right.
No, I mean, it's always going to be the case that sexy action sports news gets more ratings than the news, because that's just how entertainment works. If you make it spicy, then more people will come. But that's a form of selling out. If you're an advocate or indeed an activist, then sacrificing the things you're trying to sensibly advocate for, sacrificing that for the sake of ratings is gonna fuck you up. It's gonna eat you from the inside. That's what we've always aimed for with Honey Badger Radio. I think we aim for longevity rather than views. You know, we want to build something that's still going to be here in 30 years, or when we're all dead. even if it hasn't, you know, taken the world by storm by then. We at least want some kind of, I don't want to say community, because there's a lot of stank on that word, but, you know, something that doesn't rely on platforms like YouTube and Twitter, because that's all going to get pulled out from under us any day now. And it's important to have some kind of air raid shelter, some kind of bunker for when this all goes under. And yeah, and ratings aren't going to help you when you get twisted off of YouTube, you know.
aren't feminists and aren't MRAs, most men and most women actually really love each other, and there isn't a gender war. Women are always gonna love the men who are their fathers and brothers and sons and husbands, and you know, and vice versa. So yeah, I don't know, I really hope that I personally will be able to move on from this if one day it ever stops being so crazy. But I don't know what territory we're getting into. I do hope that, you know, Douglas Murray calls it George and the Dragon syndrome. Once you've slain the dragon, you go walking around with your sword trying to find another dragon. But yeah, you know, like women complaining about the pink tax, and you know, this that is absolute nonsense, and this non-existent wage gap, and all this kind of thing. It's an agenda looking for a problem, isn't it? So.
Zdeněk Hanslick. Any hands, any names? Nobody. Exactly what I expected. Let me tell you about Zdeněk Hanslick, whose name I only properly learned to pronounce this morning. Zdeněk Hanslick, on the 22nd of September this year, 2 months ago, put on a one-man protest outside the Parliament buildings in Wellington, New Zealand, which also houses, I believe, I'm not sure about this, I think the family courts are there. And he held up placards, one of which said, "My vote no, family courts racket." And the other one said, sorry, I'm going to have to look. Sorry. The other one said, in Iran you stone women, in New Zealand fathers. Then he poured a jerry can of petrol over himself and set fire to it. And he died in hospital of obviously terrible injuries 2 days later. I picked up this story on Twitter on the Fathers for Justice site. They had picked it up from New Zealand. I followed it up. There was no name given. There was no media coverage. There was no media coverage at all in the UK, barely any in New Zealand. It took me 10 or 15 emails to the hospital, the police, fathers groups, even to establish his name. Then I found out that he'd been 60 years old. He'd been married to a Japanese woman, marriage had broken down. The courts had permitted the wife to take the children to Japan against his wishes. The children had no connection with Japan. Very, very common story, right? So after all those emails, a helpful guy in Auckland, who was a Mackenzie lawyer, wrote to me and he said, "I don't think anybody would have given a crap about Stan," that was what his nickname was, "if you hadn't taken an interest." And that, my friends, is the truth. Nobody gives a crap. What Stan did is much the same as Emily Davison, very much the same as Jan Palach. Nobody in this room knew his name. And if nobody in this room knew his name, nobody in the bloody world knows his name. Yeah, quite right. And that's the truth that we have to face. I was walking.
But one thing I should have said was that one of the very, very few people who did respond to me when I was trying to find out about him was a member of a father's group who said, I just assumed that he was a guy with mental health problems. That's a guy from a father's rights group. Now, I mean, what I should have said in the speech was, nobody said that about Emily Davison. Well, as a matter of fact, Queen Mary did say that she thought Emily Davison probably was a woman with mental health problems. And nobody said it about Jan Palach. I thought that he was a young man with mental health problems. But here we have a member of a father's rights group making the presumption that somebody who's so desperate about their own position and about the position of other people like them, that he would do such a terrible thing, and saying, well, I just assumed he was somebody with mental health problems. I think that's indicative, I think that tells us something about the way in which the world receives and treats these issues. And also what I intended to go on to say was that if the world takes no notice when a man takes his own life in such a dramatic way to draw attention to his own story and to the story of people in comparable circumstances, if the world doesn't care about an infringement of human rights which is so elemental that you're separated from your own children by force of law. And I mean, it's hard to imagine any breach of human rights greater than that. If the world doesn't care about that, then the world doesn't care about, any of the inequalities and injustices and disadvantages that affect men and boys. The world has no interest in them.
Throughout my time researching, writing and talking to people involved in the promotion of men's rights issues or the critique of opponents, I came into contact with a colossal range of opinion about the problems and what solutions should be pursued. All of these need to be heard. There can be little doubt concerning the seriousness of the subjects about which many have passionately delved deep into. I don't know what the future holds for these people. Many feel progress towards getting important and intelligent discussions held in the public arena has been frustratingly slow. The people I met are a marked departure from the common caricature of men's rights activists. For the sake of immensely serious social problems, their arguments need to be heard.